Welcome to the latest edition of the Legislative Reference Bureau's Oral History Project. Today we're talking to former Assembly Minority Leader and Governor Tommy Thompson. Tommy, let's start at the beginning.
Well, first off, let me say hello, Michael, and thank you very much for doing the program, and thank you very much for having me. It's quite an honor. I've been around this building for 35 years, but then actually 40 years, because I was also a messenger and also a political analyst. It was one of the first Ford scholarships here at the Capitol when I was going to school. So I've been in this Capitol well over 40 years. And so I know this building all over, but I didn't ever expect to see a place where you could come down and take oral interviews from former legislators. So it's an honor to be here. So let's get on with the interview.
You grew up in Elroy?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about Elroy.
Elroy is a very small rural agrarian community, and population back when I grew up was 1,604. And today it's lost 100 individuals, and population is 1,504. I still farm there. I farm 1,000 acres on the old Thompson family farm, and delighted to go back every weekend and see how the farm's doing. But I grew up and went to school. I walked to school in a two-room schoolhouse. First 4 years with one teacher, Mrs. Ruth Grange, and the second the second 4 grades with Mrs. Arvilla Rogers. So I only had 2 teachers in 8 grades and only one building and spent 8 years in that building. And now it's still there, and it's a house. And went away to school after I graduated from Elroy High School. And we had 55 kids in our graduating class, and played all sports, but you pretty much had to, because if I didn't play football or basketball, the girl next door had to. So it was the type of thing that I had to participate in order to make things work. So
did you live in town, or did you live on the farm?
I lived on the city and the farm, both places, and walked to school every single day. It was about a mile walk. And so we didn't have buses at that particular time to take the kids to that school, so I had to walk every single day to school, and it would help develop the constitution of your body.
And who were your parents?
My parents, my father was a small town grocer, Alan Thompson. Great, he was a big guy, bigger than I am, and he went away to the University of Wisconsin. First one in his family, and he got injured as his first year in law school, so he never completed. He had a compound fracture of his leg, and he always was disabled because his one leg was 3/4 of an inch shorter than the other one. But he ran a grocery store very successfully with his brother John, and I worked there from the time I was age 5 to when I went away to the University of Wisconsin. One of the great reasons for going to the university was to get away from my father. My mother was a school teacher, great school teacher, and she taught in first grade, in kindergarten, and first grade. And before that, she taught in 8 grades at the Knickerbocker High School, or grade school. And so we had a great family, and one older sister, 2 younger brothers, and we didn't realize we were poor until we went away to school and found out how poor we were. But it was a good family, good upbringing, and I love Elroy. And as I've said, I'm back there every weekend pretty much when I can to work on the farm, and I actually help bring in the crops and plant the crops and tend to the cattle. So my roots are back in Elroy, and I love it, and that's where I came from.
How did that influence your decision to go into politics?
Well, first off,
your political outlook.
My father was on the county board. He was chairman of the Road and Bridge Committee, and every Friday night in the Elroy grocery store, the Thompson grocery store, the farmers and the local Pauls, the politicians come in and with beer and coffee and crackers and salami, sat around and talked about things that were going on. And I was in awe of these individuals because they were the leaders of the county and of the city of Elroy. And my father was chairman of the Road and Bridge Committee, and they decided over these events, what roads had to be built, how they could improve the infrastructure in Elroy and Mauston and Juneau County. And I really learned from those individuals. I learned how, to make decisions. I learned, my love affair for transportation was started at a very young age, listening to my father and all the local individuals talk about roads and bridges and building construction and so on. And on Sundays, we'd go around and take a look at the construction. So I had a first-hand knowledge of roads and bridges from a very early age and all the way through high school.
So you had the political bug a little bit at an early age.
My father was on the county board.
How many years was he on the board?
He was on the county board until he died. I think he was there 35 years. So
35 years.
He was vice chairman of the county and chairman of the Road and Bridge Committee. They always wanted him to be the chairman, but he said, no, I'd rather be the chairman of the Road and Bridge Committee so I have a bigger impact in building the county. So it was, I guess I got it, my love affair from politics, listening to him, listening to the local Pauls come in and talk about politics, talk about government. And we never talked, Republican and Democrat. It was just how to get things done. And I to this day don't know how they were. I think my father might have been a Republican. I think my mother was a Democrat, but I'm not exactly sure. My grandfather, my mother's father, ran for the state assembly, the seat that I finally got elected to. At a young age when he was farming out there as a progressive.
Oh, yeah.
And so he loved Bill Ebu, and they read the Capital Times. My father read the Capital Times every day. And so.
But he was not elected.
My grandfather was not. He got defeated. There was a primary for, at that time, it was just Juneau County. Who was going to elect Juneau County in the state legislature? And my grandfather, Charles Dutton, ran for it in 1928. And as a progressive, I think a progressive Republican, got defeated in the primary. So I guess I come by the political bug or the political genes from both sides, my mother and my father.
And then you went to college. Was it just assumed that you would go to college? Was your father had been?
My father, really felt, he got deprived of being a lawyer, and being the oldest son, he certainly wanted me to go to college. And I think secretly he was very happy that I decided to go into law because he boxed at the university, my father did, and when they had boxing, and he wanted me to go to the University of Wisconsin, didn't put a lot of pressure on me. And I think he was very happy, that I decided to go to law school, not happy that he had to continue to help finance it, which he didn't do much of it, but he did a little. But so it was, and I was working at the state capitol when I was.
And what were you doing at that age at the Capitol?
Well, I had to work my way through college, so I worked every year. I tended bar at the Varsity Bar on State Street. I bus food at some restaurants around town, and I also worked. Up here in the Capitol, they had a program, the Ford Scholarship Program, Ford Tuition, back in the 50s was started, and I started. I think it started in '59 or 1960, and they were looking for young college students in political science and law that wanted to come up and work. And I came up here, and I came up and applied for the job. With Louis Ramel, who was my state legislator. And Louis Ramel from Adams County wouldn't interview me. He would not talk to me because he was afraid that I might run against him. He knew my father was in the county, and so he probably thought, well, maybe this kid has got an eye on my seat, so why should I help him? I'm sure that's what. And later on we became friends, and he did say that. He said, and so he wouldn't interview me, so I went across the hall and applied for the state senate. Jess Miller. Jess Miller was an old-time senator from Richland
County. Yeah.
Richland County, and he knew my father because Richland County. He had worked with my father, who was chairman of the Road and Bridge Committee, and worked on highways and transportation. Jess was very instrumental and excited about helping out in rural Wisconsin, and especially in that area of the state, Juneau County being part of Richland County and helping out. And he was our state senator, and so Juneau County was in there. But I never met the man. He was homesick and he died before I ever had a chance to meet him. When I went in to interview for him, I interviewed somebody, and they called just Senator Miller, and he said, "Sure, hire him." He's Alan Thompson's son. I know his father. I know he's a a good guy, and so they hired me sight unseen. And I never did get a chance to see Jess Miller. Never got a chance to say thank you to him. But they hired me, and I went to work for Harry Levander, who was the deputy chief of staff, deputy sergeant of arms at that time in the state senate. And then this program started, and I applied for the program, and they assigned me to Senator Alan Busby from West Dallas. And Helen Grant was the woman that ran the office, was his secretary, his legislative assistant. I was starting in law school, and Alan Busby was a lawyer from West Dallas, and he wanted me to read the bills. He read every bill. Little guy with a pencil mustache, a wonderful gentleman, and a Republican has never been elected after Alan Busby left that area.
Not from that district, no.
And he was the last Republican, but he was loved in his community because he was dedicated. He came on Tuesday afternoon, practiced law Tuesday morning, and he taught me, you can do both. And so I learned from Alan Busby how to maximize my time efficiently in the legislature as well as practicing law. So he practiced law. Tuesday morning went to court, probate court, which he was handling a lot of estates at that particular time. Then he'd come up on Tuesday afternoon, be here till Thursday noon, then he would leave. But he would spend Tuesday night before we had the committee meeting on Wednesday, and he'd sit down with me and Helen in his office, and we'd go over the bills for the next day. He had read them. He'd ask me my ideas. He'd ask Helen. Helen had more sway than I did, but she had been with him a lot longer. And we discussed legislation. And so that's how I became acclimated to legislation, how to read a bill fast, how to prepare amendments, because he would ask me to prepare amendments on the bills that he wanted to amend. So I had a great learning experience. And then about a year later, Harry Levander came to me and said, "You're in law school." And he said, I need two individuals. And he hired John Gable and me. He says, "You're not going to be, I know I need the money." And he says, "This is a job from 5 to 9. I just want you to take care of the Capitol when I leave at 5 o'clock. Senators need something, you got to take care of it. If we're in session, you got to sort of run it." And so John Gable was going to grad school, and I was going to law school. So John and I became the two and Harry's boys. And he says, "If you get caught up, you don't have to do anything. Study." So I don't care, but I just have to have two dependable guys to be here to take care of things if something comes up. And so from 5 to 9 for the last year in law school, I was here as Harry Levander's associate or assistant in the Sergeant of Arms office.
Where did they stow you? Where
right in the sergeant's office. We ran the sergeant's office. He would go home at 5 o'clock, and John Gable and I would handle all the things. If the senators were still around, we took care of them. If they needed something, we'd get some of the pages to do something. Otherwise, we'd do it ourselves. If they needed some legislation, we'd take care of that. And when they were in session, it was our responsibility to make sure all the senators showed up. One cute story. There was a senator by the name of Packy McFarland, who was a Cudahy,
right?
And wouldn't happen today, but back then it was sort of a, and I'll tell the story. It's sort of an interesting one. They were in session, and Packy was missing, and Packy had liked to have a drink at the end of the day, and so they sent us over to the old Park Motor Inn, see if John and I could find Packy, and Packy had a package on. Today's, the press would have written about that and said something. Back then, you tried to take care of them, making sure. And so our job was to get them back because at that time the Senate was on call, which means,
everybody has to come.
Everybody has to come, so we had to bring them back. Packy didn't want to come. We finally got his coat on, and we started walking across the street. And Packy, being the boxer and being a little under the weather, decided that when he got stepped on up from the road up to the curb, he decided to let loose. I don't remember if he took a swing at John Gable, who was on his left-hand side, or me on the right-hand side, but both of us ducked, and he went all the way around and fell down and sort of went to sleep. And so we didn't know if he had hit his head or got hurt, so we had to get him up. We called Harry, and Harry was all concerned, and we got him back in his office and got him some coffee. And he went up and voted, and everything was completely forgotten about it. And we took him back to his office, and he went to sleep. So it was the kind of story that wouldn't happen today, but back then those things happened, not frequently, but did happen.
But it ended well.
It ended well, and nobody got hurt. And Packy got the vote, and Packy went to sleep, and John or I never asked him again about the roundhouse swing. But I'll still remember, it was type of thing that happened back then that you would never see in the legislature today.
So this is around the time you're in law school now?
I'm in law school.
And you were still in law school when you first ran for the assembly, am I correct?
I wanted to run, and I wanted to run because I was going to go become a JAG officer in the Air Force. And I had signed up to be a JAG officer and in the Air Force. And I had signed the final papers, and they were going to call me up, I think, in January. I thought in my head, I'm going to graduate. I had 3 more credits in law school. I had graduated, but I had 3 more credits to pick up in the summer. So I thought to myself, I'm not going to be able to get a very good job, and why don't I take my 3 courses. I took it from Professor Jake Boisher on water rights, and I wrote a paper for him. Got the highest mark, 94, that I ever got in law school from that course, and then I also announced for the state assembly. I figured, Mike, that I could run for the state assembly, probably lose because Louis Rommel at that time, the guy that wouldn't interview me. We had Adams, Juneau, Marquette. He was from Adams, I was from Juneau, Marquette County, and there was always a primary in Adams, Juneau, Marquette. Ben Tremaine was the assemblyman for a while. He represented Juneau County. Louis Rommel was assemblyman, and they traded off. You look back in the history, I think Ben Tremaine got elected a couple times, Louis Rommel got elected more, but they ran against each other. They didn't like each other. And so every primary, it was either Louis was going to get more votes out of Adams County and win, and he usually got Adams and Marquette. So the chances of him winning were a little bit better. And so they ran against him. And that year that I decided to run, Ben Tremaine announced that he was not going to run for the state assembly, or else I wouldn't run. I expected Ben to run from Juneau County. When he didn't run, it came to me, why don't you run, Tommy? And I thought that, I couldn't win. Louis would win. But in 4 years, when I got out of the Air Force, I'd come back, and Louis would probably be ready to retire. And I'd have
get your name out there.
I have established my name. And so I decided to run. And so Louis Rommel, I announced, and Louis Rommel was upset that he had a primary. But he found out that I was going to summer school down here to finish up my law school. And he didn't know how many credits or anything like this. And so I was still tending bar, still working out at WPS, still, putting myself through school, and I was going home on weekends. But he thought, because I was not up there full time, that I was not interested. And so he went on a cruise to Alaska, which was his mistake. And so I get out of summer school with my 3 credits. So I'm a lawyer now and got my law degree. I don't have to worry about the Air Force until January, when I was going to sign and go. And so I got nothing to do from August 1st, and I think the election was something around September 15th. Yeah. I had about 6 weeks, okay? And my father, and so I borrowed $1,000. I borrowed $1,000 and bought a 1960 Ford that had 200,000 miles on it. And you could actually see through the floorboards and see the ground. It had 4 bald tires, and I paid $500 for the car, and I ran on highway safety, and the car was a piece of junk, but I ran on highway safety. And then my father would give me $10 every day. And so I had $500 in the car, I had $500 in my camp fund, never got a cent.
You never got a cent from anybody but your
Nobody,
dad.
because everybody was supporting Louis. The caucus at that time, Ted Corman, he was the head of the caucus, they were running Louis's campaign. Louis went to Alaska in August, which was his mistake. My father gave me $10, and I had an individual by the name of Gene Delmore who worked on the county highway department. He plowed roads and cut grass, and he worked for the county in the day, and in the evening, he was my campaign manager. And so my father gave me $10. I'd put $5 in gas and oil. It took a lot of oil, almost as much oil in the car as it did gas, and we would go around, and we would. And Gene was with me in the evenings. During the day, I would go to these little communities. Nobody's ever gone door to door. And I didn't have anything else to do. I had no money, didn't have a job. So from August to September 15th, I went to every place I could go. I would knock on doors. First I'd walk, and then I found a way to get people to start talking to me. I'd go into the local bars and buy the individual, the town drunk or whoever it was, a 10-cent beer. You couldn't do that today, but I bought him a 10-cent beer, and then I'd walk out. And one of the tavern owners, Louis Cotter, remember that guy? He said, just go buy him a beer, and he'll talk about you all day. And so I did that, and did it real early in the morning because there was nobody else in the bar because I couldn't afford it. And I'd go in and sit down at these local bars and find the lone guy and buy him a beer. By 2 o'clock, he had enough, and he was like, you should have been here this morning. That young Tommy Thompson from Elmore came in, bought the whole bar a drink, and it got my name out. And then I went all around. I'd knock on doors, and if I saw a wedding, I'd go over and introduce myself, and they liked the fact, that I was there and was running for the assembly. And the bride usually would ask me to be in the wedding pictures. So I don't know how many wedding pictures I got in, just going in and being somewhat aggressive with the funerals. Went to, I'm not saying that's a great way to campaign. And then at 6, 7 o'clock, I figure you probably should not be knocking on doors anymore. So by this time, Gene Delmore we would team up. Then we would go to the bowling alleys. Or to the pool halls, and we'd play pool, and we would bowl, and till midnight. We'd just go from one bowling alley to another, and talk to the farmers, talk to the people. They come in and congregate, and great time. We had no money, but they were happy to see us, and happy that somebody would out and talk to them. This young guy wants to represent us, and I wanted to represent him. They'd ask me questions. I didn't know much, but the fact that I was there. And so until midnight, and then we went home, and I'd start the next day, and I didn't have anything else to do, so I'd go home and get up at 6 and start the whole day again, and I would just cover the area. And then Louis Ramel, I'll never forget this, came home and on the weekend. Came back from Alaska, and there was the Harrisville, they had the Harrisville Brat Festival on Labor Day. Harrisville, it's in Marquette County, way up in, up by Westfield, up sort of the northern part of thing, and they had a big crowd. A couple thousand people show up for this 2 or 3 day celebration. I was there on the big day, and Louis Ramel showed up. And I didn't know, I'd never met Louis, and so we ran into each other campaigning. And Louis was very nice, and he said, young man, he said, I hear that you're really out working hard. And I said, yeah, I really am, Mr. Ramel. And so good to meet you. He says, good to meet you. I know your dad, your mother. And I said, well, that's nice. They say nice things about you. And I said, well, that's fine. And I said, I hope your health is good. He said, oh, yes. He said, Tommy, he said, I'm going to win the election because you're too young and so on and so forth. But I want you to know that I'm not going to be here forever. And the next time when I don't run again, you want to run, I'll support you. I said, that's very nice of you. We shook hands and left. That's sort of a nice way. That's how I met my opponent. No debates, no nothing, no accusations or anything. We met at a Brock Festival in Harrisville, Wisconsin. And then we went debating all over, or not debating, we went campaigning. And he got really worried because he had heard, that I was all over. And so he started campaigning really hard, but he only had 2 weeks, and then the election. And it was tough. Juneau County Republican Party endorsed him. My home county endorsed him over me. The city of Elroy put in an ad, and the little city of Elroy put in an ad saying, Louis Ramel has been a great friend of the city of Elroy. My father and mother were fuming. They'd been business people, and so you could see that I didn't have any support. Mm-hmm. The caucus down here was working against me. All of the people, that were involved were supporting Louis Ramel. I had nobody except Gene Delmore, my mother and father and family, my hard work. And they kept putting ads in. We had no money, so we couldn't put any ads in. But I felt good because people were recognizing me every place I was going after 6 weeks of being every place at everything, just about. People really got to know me. And the night of the election, my father was chairman of the Highway, Road and Bridge, and Buzz Kelly had run against Louis Ramel, and he was the highway commissioner, and he had connections with all the other highway commissioners in Adams and Marquette County. I still remember that at 8 o'clock that night, or 8:15, Buzz Kelly calls me. Now, he's the highway commissioner. He says, "Good things, Tommy. You're leading in all counties. You're going to win." I said, "You're kidding me." I thought I might have a chance to carry Juneau County, but never thought I would carry it. He says, "No, you're winning in Adams County, Marquette County, and Juneau County. You're winning every county." And he says, "You're going to win." And I think I eventually lost in Adams County. I'm not sure. But I think I won by 600 or 700 votes in the primary. And it was just absolutely amazing. It was like, something really unreal happened here, that somebody could come out of nowhere and beat a 16-year incumbent. It was 16 years over all the years that he was in the assembly, taking into consideration a few of those years he got defeated by Ben Tremaine. But he came back. So a total career of 16 years, and I won him handily. And then everybody wanted to support me. Ted Cormany, the head of the Republican Assembly Caucus, called me, and I think they gave me $50 in stamps. I think that was my. It came up.
Was this now the Republican Party? Or?
Yeah. He gave me $50 in stamps. What am I going to do with $50?
Nothing to mail.
But use it for mailing. They said, "We didn't support you in the primary, but now that you've won, we're going to support you." They were still, sort of sarcastic about it. I was only 24, and they never expected to see that. And then I ran against an individual by the name of Les Baumgartner, who ran a mobile station in Adams.
He was a Democrat?
Democrat. And Jim Wimmer, there was the big fight then was not mine. The big fight was over the 27th senatorial district. Back then they had senatorial districts. And if you remember correctly, I think Jess Miller had part of that, and they reapportioned, and there was a brand new district. And Everett Cy Bidwell ran the ice cream plant in Portage, Wisconsin from Columbia County. And Walter Ike Terry was the assemblyman from Sauk County, and they didn't get along very well. One was a farmer, one was a businessman in Columbia County, and they put Adams, Juneau, Marquette, Columbia, and Sauk together in a brand new Senate district called the 27th. And both of those individuals had supported Louis Ramel because they thought that there was no chance that they would support a young guy like me. But Ike Terry beat Everett Cy Bidwell in the primary. And then 4 years later, Bidwell beat Ike Terry, and Bidwell was the senator until Russ Feingold beat him. And so I know the district and the history. And Jim Wimmer, I don't know if you know that name, he eventually became the state senator from, he eventually became the state chairman of the Democratic Party. He was a young man like me, and he and I got along just fine. And I didn't have any really allegiance to the Republican Party. They endorsed somebody else. I didn't have really any allegiance to Walter Terry because he had supported Louis Ramel and put in an ad in favor of Louis Ramel over me. So I really had Jim Wimmer, the Democrat, and Tommy Thompson, the young Republican, really got along. And so we started supporting each other and helping each other out in the campaign. Edward Bidwell, so you never find that in modern day politics, but I supported Jim Wimmer and he supported me. And the night of the election, Walt Terry beat Jim Wimmer, and I defeated Les Baumgard and became the youngest assemblyman at that time at the age of 24.
That was the end of your plans to go into the service.
And then I went into the National Guard because I wanted to serve. I became an officer in the National Guard. Well, that's another story for another day. But anyway, then Jim Wimmer, I gave his eulogy at his funeral. Jim Wimmer became the state chairman of the Democratic Party, and we were friends forever. And I became the youngest assemblyman. Then the interesting story, you'll like this one if you're doing oral history. We had a big fight for this speaker.
First session
Because the Republicans took over. We had lost the assembly. I think Bob, what was his name? He was from West Dallas, had been the speaker.
The Democrat?
Yes.
Huber?
Bob Huber, I think. And then Republicans, I can't remember exactly sure about that, but then Republicans won control of the assembly. So now we have the opportunity to elect a speaker. I'm the freshman. None of these people have supported me, so I could care less. So Kurt McKay is running, Paul Alfonsi's running, Harold Clemens is running, and Harold Freilich is coming. Harold Freilich is the only one that came to see me in Elroy. And Harold Freilich came and said, I want to see you. I'm running for speaker. And I remember it was 3:30 in the afternoon on a Friday afternoon. And we sat down in my father and mother's front room. And he said, and I said, very nice meeting you, but you didn't support me. He said, no, I didn't support you. I supported Louis. And Louis was going to support me. And I said, well, that doesn't mean anything. And he said, I want you to support me. And I said, why should I? He said, because I'm the most conservative, and I know you're a conservative. And I said, well, I am a conservative. But I said, I don't know if I want to support you. I haven't, everybody was calling me. Shabazz was calling me, and Kurt McKay was calling me, Alfonsi, and Clemens was calling me. And I said, I'll tell you what, Mr. Freilich, I'll support you, but for that support, you got to give me a seat on the Joint Finance Committee. Now, I knew what I was talking about because I knew I was 24 years of age.
You were not new to the Capitol.
I was not new to the Capitol. I knew that that's where the power was. I knew that if I'm going to play an impact, I got to be on the Joint Finance Committee.
What did he say to that?
He said, absolutely not. He said, we don't put freshmen on the Joint Finance Committee. I said, okay, fine. Nice meeting you. And walked out. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. I still remember that. And he said, I'll stay in touch. I said, fine. And and so he left, and I made my views known. I was not shy at all. I said, you give me Joint Finance Committee, I'll support you. Because I didn't have any reason to support anybody because every one of them had worked against me. Uh-huh. And then it started getting real tense because Alfonsi went with Harold Clemens, the moderate, and Kurt McKay went with Harold Freilich. They started coalescing. There was four candidates, and John Shabazz was with Kurt McKay. Byron Wackett was Harold Freilich. These are names from way early. And so Byron Wackett was calling me for Harold Freilich, and John Shabazz was calling me for Kurt McKay, and Paul Alfonso was calling me for Harold Clemens. And so it finally got down to Harold Clemens versus Harold Freilich. Harold Freilich calls me about 2 weeks out, says, I really need you. And I said, that's fine. I says, I haven't made up my mind, but if you give me Joint Finance Committee, I'll be with you. Freilich, because I can't give you Joint Finance. You're only a freshman. I says, Mr. Freilich, That's the price. Joint finance. A week later, he called me and says, you got joint finance. I said, can I trust you? He says, absolutely. I gave you my word. And then 3 days later, he calls me and he says, my team doesn't trust you. They don't think you'll support me. And I says, just the same way, I don't know if I can trust you. You said I could. You can trust me. I'll be there. And it was down the day of the election between Harold Clemens and Harold Freilich. Was Harold Clemens claims he had, I think, 29 votes, and Freilich said he had 29. Somebody was lying.
Yeah, it doesn't add up.
It didn't add up.
What was the size of the caucus? Do you
57.
Remember? 57.
29, 28, or it could have been 55, but it was, you'll have to look back. But anyway, it was one vote difference. And Warren Nose really wanted Harold Clemens to get it, didn't want Freilich, and he was the governor. And so the election came, and Freilich won by one vote. And he knew that I had voted for him. And it was a shock to the caucus when he announced, because everybody wanted Joint Finance Committee, he put me on Joint Finance Committee. But it was the deal. So as a freshman, I became a Joint Finance Committee, and Harold, it had all the conservatives on there. Byron Wackett was the chairman. Russ Olson was on it. Remember, Lieutenant Governor, Merrill Stahlbaum, John Shabazz, Ken Merkel, and Tommy Thompson. And the Democrat was from the Assembly was Ron Paris, who voted with us all the time. And then the other side was the Senate. And so I got on Joint Finance Committee and was able to use that power base, to develop legislation. And I got some of my best legislation done the first 4 years when we were in the majority and I was on the Joint Finance Committee.
What were the issues you were interested in at that time?
Well, I got some big things done, except I had a real tough time getting reelected. There was a dam in Montello, the Buffalo Lake Dam. I was able to get in the Joint Finance Committee $60,000 to repair the Montello Dam. People in Marquette County, Montello loved it. And then I started the Youthful Offender Act. The Youthful Offender Act, and this was my idea. And I got it through and got it passed. The Youthful Offender Act was to allow for young men between the age of 18 and 35 to be able to go on to school while in prison, be able to get educated, and be able to get vocational training in drug and alcohol abuse training. It was a very specialized program, sort of modern at that particular time, sort of visionary for what was needed. And then I got money to build a prison, a youthful offender institution, not a prison, a place for 18 to 35 to be intensive training and counseling and education. And it's between Oxford, where I practiced law, and Westfield in a little community called Brooks in Adams County. And the fact that I got that done was really amazing. And as a freshman, and we got this, and we started building the Youthful Offender Institute. And Pat Lucy got elected in 1970, huge election. And that was over the fact that we Republicans, which is sort of resembling what's taking place today, which we can get into.
Well, I was going to ask you about 70 because you got wiped out.
Wiped out, that was it. But anyway, we built the prison, and Pat Lucy, after he got elected, went up to Brooks, Wisconsin. And Brooks is a very small community. It was very windy and very sandy, and the sand was blowing. Pat Lucy got out of the house, or got out of the car, got back in, and he says, "We are never going to open that prison. We're never going to open that prison. This is a terrible place to have it." And there was the Secretary of Administration was who became a professor over in Michigan, Dave Adamati, and was with him. And so Dave Adamati negotiated a sale before we ever opened up my prison, Youthful Offender Institution in Adams County. The Youthful Offender, they sold it to the federal government, and it's turned out to be one of the finest prisons in the federal inventory. It's still operating today, and it's wonderful. But I had built it for a Youthful Offender Institution, beautiful prison. We never made any money on it. We had $10 million in bonds. The federal government never gave us a dime. They just took over the bonds. And we gave the thing away. We had a huge fight on the floor. But as you know, Republicans got wiped out. I led the fight and got beat badly by the Democrats, and Pat Lucy signed it. And I didn't get my revenge until Pat Lucy's funeral, when I was the only Republican that Pat Lucy wanted me to give the eulogy for, and Dave Adamany was there. And so I brought up the prison thing, and I says, Dave Adamany, you were wrong then, you are today. So that was part of my eulogy to my friend Pat Lucy.
The revenge served very cold.
What?
Revenge served very cold.
Very cold. Many years after that, but I could see Dave Adamany, because I told him someday I'm going to get even. But it took Pat Lucy's funeral for me to give the eulogy to be able to tell Dave Adamany how upset I was. But we talked and laughed afterwards. But it's turned out to be a great prison for the federal government. And then I also worked on something. At that time, we were having a real tough time getting doctors to come to rural Wisconsin. And so I went out to the medical school and ran into a doctor by the name of Mark Hansen. Dr. Mark Hansen. I said, what can we do? And he said, you know what we can do, Tommy? We can set up a program for family docs. And so I sponsored my second term, the family doc program, to set up the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Wisconsin. And I think that was my finest piece of legislation. I set this up for rural Wisconsin so doctors could come, get trained in rural Wisconsin. Our idea was we would train them in rural Wisconsin, they would like it, and stay. And there was an incentive in them for going into the department. And the Department of Family Medicine was one of the first in the country. It's one of the finest in the country as well. And I started that in conjunction with the department, and Mark Hansen was the doctor who helped me, and we wrote the thing, and I got it through the legislature. And a lot of people take credit for it, but it was my legislation, my idea, and I got it through with Mark Hansen, and that was, to me, it was one of the best pieces of legislation that passed. And then after that, the following year, I came in and got the physician's assistant program set up, where you could work for a doctor. So I'm actually the father of the Department of Family Medicine, and also and also the program for physician's assistants, and also the Youthful Offender Act. So those are some of my legislation in my first 2 years plus the.
You're in the majority at 69, 70.
Yes, right. And then back then the Republicans were arrogant, and I liken it somewhat to today. That there's an arrogance, that's with, the old adage is, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I'm not saying that corruption at all. I'm just saying that there's an arrogance in the air when you control both houses in the governorship. There's an ability to forget, that there's an other political party, other views, and we had the same problem. We were in strong majority, and we lost some seats in '68. But we still had a nice majority in both the Senate and in the House. And I think we had 56 seats, and 54, 56, I can't remember. And we had the election. And I was worried because I had went into the National Guard my second term before I get to this election. I was worried about my re-election because even though I was very popular and done some things, I had went to the National Guard. And I went to basic training in Fort Bliss, Texas. And then I had advanced training in Fort Huachuca. And Governor Knowles, we had a big fight in the spring of the years over highway safety. And he wanted us to put in a sales tax, and he wanted to put in a highway safety bill, and we turned him down on highway safety. We reluctantly went along with the sales tax. And that's what killed us in the election. But anyway, I was worried about it. And then I went away, and Governor Knowles called for a highway safety bill and special session. I'm in basic training. I can't get out of basic training to come back and vote. And there were a lot of votes, and I missed them. And people knew I was in the Army, but back then it was very unusual for a legislator to go to the Army. It happens more frequently today for the National Guard, but back then it was really unheard of. And there was a gentleman from Adams County ran against me as a Democrat, a realtor, Steve Baumgartner. And not Steve, what was his name? Steve Baumgartner? Well,
I got that here somewhere.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he ran against me. And Jim Devitt was a Republican. Remember that name?
I got the name Schmidt.
Yeah, Les Schmidt.
Les Schmidt.
Yeah, Les Schmidt. He was a realtor from Adams County. And and I was away, and Jim Devitt was a Republican, came in with me, and he had a better attendance. And so he had Joe Phillips, who was then the caucus director, took over from Ted Cormany, and they went and found out all the absentees of all the people. So my political party, my caucus, put this all out. Jim Devitt was the leader on attendance, and Tommy Thompson was down here. My caucus did this, not the Democrats, the Republicans. And so Les Schmidt took this absenteeism and put a vacant chair in the legislature. Where's Tommy? Missed all these votes. It was all on highway safety and highway construction and so on and so forth, which was very emotional. And I thought, And it
Was
was
it
all
by television or newspaper? Or
just newspapers back
just
then.
newspapers?
And newspaper and radio back there, and used a lot. And I thought, and then we had also the mercury scare on the Wisconsin River. That's a long time before you, that you probably didn't know about. And it was there, and the Wisconsin River goes right through my district, and between Splits, Adams, and Juneau County. And a lot of the resort owners were upset because there was a warning out you couldn't
eat the fish.
Couldn't eat the fish, and all these resort owners, and Schmidt, to his credit, said, well, Tommy Thompson was there under his watch, so I got blamed for that. Absenteeism, I thought sure I was going to get wiped out. I won handily, got over 60% of the vote, but it was a difficult time. Then the next election, term, we're back in the assembly. We're pretty, and I'm
This is
still
the
on
69 session.
Yeah, and we got the sales tax. And Warren Olds says we need money. And John Shabazz is leading the conservatives, saying we're not going to put a sales tax. And we get into some really acrimonious kind of arguments with the governor, and it's testy. And Harold Freilich the speaker. And Harold Freilich is going toe-to-toe with the governor. A Republican governor, can you imagine a Republican governor, Warren Olds, popular, wants a sales tax? Republicans in the Assembly saying, no way are we going to have it. The Senate, by Republicans, they're more with Warren Olds, and we got these conservatives, and they're saying absolutely not. And so we get into this fight, and Warren Olds comes to our caucus and to the Republican caucus to talk about the need for the sales tax. And he gives a nice speech, and I'm there, and Warren Olds gets up and Paul, what was his chief of staff, was there. Paul, no, his son ran for was DNR secretary, and then he ran for attorney general a couple of elections back. But anyway, his father was a newspaper man from up, and he was there, and Russ Olson asked a question, and it was tense in the caucus, and Warren Olds lost it. Then asked the question, he says, if you don't want me to run, I'm not going to run. And he says, see what you guys can do, and walked out. I mean, here's the governor just losing his temper in front. And Russ Olson, to this day, I can remember, I was seated here in Warren, and Russ Olson was seated under the window. And Russ Olson says, what did I say that caused that? I just asked him a question. But it was so tense. And then the Senate finally passed it, and we had it. We voted it down. It came back up, and we passed the sales tax by 1 or 2 votes. I think I voted against it, but it passed, and it was late in the year, and Pat Lucy was running against Jack Olson from the Dells.
It was the general sales tax.
It was a general sales tax, and I still remember in October, Jack Olson's leading the polls. I don't know how accurate polls were back
He was
then.
running against Lucy.
It was Pat Lucy was running against Jack Olson. Everybody expected Republicans to win. And Pat Lucy is leading the charge about the sales tax and those taxing Republicans, spending crazy. And the great big ad was, he says, when you go to get your Christmas tree this year, those Republicans put a sales tax on your Christmas tree. Just remember that they are taxing Christmas. Sales tax, those Republicans. First time on television, they're really professionally done. And Pat Lucy wins the election and wipes out the state assembly. I win, but we went from 50-some down to, I think, 36 or 34. Huge.
It was 18 or 19 seats.
It was just an absolute. People that have been in the assembly forever, never expected to lose. Lost big time. People that, most of the chairmen lost. And I still won, but I think we had 30, so we was in the low 30s.
Well, what's the mindset of the survivors in a situation like that?
Well, we don't know. We elect John Shabazz as our leader. No, we didn't. It was Kurt McKay for a while, or Paul Alfonsi, but we were very much chastened by the whole thing, and it was an absolute wipeout for the Republicans. I can't remember if the Senate lost that time or if they lost.
No, they're 4 years later.
4 years later, but it was a carryover. Republicans were on the way out, and Democrats. We never really recovered. But it was that arrogance, that we thought best, and we were not responding to the people. And I did, because I was always nervous. A young guy, I was always back in my district. But most people never went home, and never went home. That's not true. But they didn't campaign hard. They just thought, the Republicans going to win. And I'm sensing a little bit of the same attitude this year, and that Republicans. I warned them. I says this could be the same thing as what happened in the election in 1970. And Lucy was there for 2 terms, and then Marty Schreiber, and then finally Lee Dravis, and then finally, we never really got control back as Republicans until I got elected governor.
There's 24 years.
Yeah.
24 years.
24 years. And Democrats dominated the state, and it was because of the arrogance of power. And we fought with the governor, and what happened? But I got to tell you one little vignette that's sort of never been told, but sort of funny. We used to do. We didn't have the open meetings laws like we had today, and we would put together the budgets, and we'd go out, would work with, would have the hearings and so on, and every night during joint finance, we would go with the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, Dale Cattenaugh, and we'd go down to a restaurant, and we would, just the Republicans plus Ron Paris was our Democrat, and we would go to the restaurants and work out the deals for the next day, and come back and that's how we put together the budget. One night we were down at, I don't know if before your time, Joe Namio had a steakhouse. It was renowned for the fact that that's where the Pauls and the people of power in Madison hung out. Great guy, and he had a little back room that was our joint finance room. And
this is pre-open meetings law.
Well, pre-open meetings, and we were in there going over, and we were. Byron Wacker was chairman of the Joint Finance Committee. I don't know if this would have been the first term or probably the first term, and we had to do something. We needed some more money in the transportation fund, so we decided that I call it the Joe Namio vote. Joe Namio's in there. He's got 2 beautiful daughters who are waitresses, 2 or 3 daughters who are waitresses, and waited on us. And he'd come in and spend time with us, bring us a bottle of wine, and we'd talk. And it was Wackett and Stahlbaum And I think Wackett and Stahlbaum, I think, wanted to go to $21. I think it was 15 or 16. Shabazz and Merkel were just adamant not to raise it anything, keep it where it was. And we had to have so much money. And Joe Namio walks in, and I remember this. He walked in and a bottle of wine is pouring wine, and he says, "Joe, what do you think on the need to raise the title fee, registration fee?" And he said, "Well, I don't know what's the deal." So they told him 21 and 15. He said, I could probably go $18. And so we voted, and Joe Namio voted. We walked out of there with, it was $18.15, I think, $18.15 was the compromise, but it was the Joe Namio amendment, and that's no, it's never been told, but Joe Namio actually had an impact on setting the title fee at $18. I think it was $18.15 because that's what we needed, the extra 15 cents to make it work.
Okay.
And so we went back and crunched the numbers, and it worked. So that's a little vignette about how things passed back then, and we had it. It was an interesting way, but we put together the budget. It was very successful.
About this time, you went into leadership.
Yes.
Why did you pursue that? You were a minority caucus vice chairperson in '71, and then next session you were assistant minority leader.
Well, basically, it was a contested thing. I think there was a gentleman from Manitowoc to run against me, and I wanted to rebuild the party. We had been decimated, and I think the caucus.
Did you lose your seat on joint finance
Sure.
after '70?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, lost everything, and so I lost the seat, and I wanted to remain some vestige of power. And this one was, Freilich was going to become the minority leader, and it was, ratchet down, and this assistant deputy caucus chairman or whatever that was, and I think Don, what was his name, I ran against. And we both were freshmen, but I sort of had the odds, the inside track because of my joint finance, because I was out campaigning for people. I knew they were in trouble. And so I won. It could have been Dave Opitz that I ran against, I can't remember. But anyway, I won and became leadership. And then I think 2 years later or 4 years later, I ran for assistant minority leader because people had left, and Shabazz was minority leader. And I was doing a good job in the caucus, campaigning for people, and raising money. And I ran. I think Dave Opitz ran against me in that, and I beat him.
That was '73 then, I think.
73, I can't remember the year, but I became the assistant minority leader, and then Shabazz.
You and Shabazz were together for 8 years, something like 7, 8 years. He was.
I don't think it was that long.
Minority leader.
I think it was. I ran for Congress. I ran for Congress because Bill Steiger lost. I was going to run for Congress. Mel Laird stepped down, became Secretary of Defense, and left the 7th Congressional District. And
that was during the Nixon administration.
What?
Nixon administration.
Nixon administration, and I was young, but I thought, I could probably win this. And Walter John Chilton was the senator from Wausau, and he wanted to run, and he knew I wanted to run, and so. And Dave Obey wanted to run as a Democrat because he was from Wausau. And Walter John Chilton came to see me. We had lunch or dinner, and he said, I got a much better chance because I come from Wausau. Obey's going to be there. I've been there longer. I'm a state senator. You're a lowly civilian. You're from the wrong area of the state, and so on. And I can win and easier. And he says, I'll support you. And the Louis Rommel. He said, you don't run, and I'll support you in the future. So,
next time. Yeah.
So I stepped back, and then Walter John Chilton. It was Nixon did something to the dairy farmers right before the election on milk prices, vetoed it or something, it just turned the whole election. And Obie won because, to this day, probably because of an action President Nixon took on dairy, because that was, Wausau down was all dairy country back then. And the farmers were furious at him. They went out and voted for Dave Obey against Walter John Schultzen, and Walter John Schultzen stayed in the state senate, and Dave Obey went on to become the congressman from the 7th district for years. But that was how that happened. And then it would have been after the election in the election had to be in 1978 or 1980, Bill Steiger just got elected. Probably the election of 1980. And Bill Steiger died before, he was diabetic and died at a young age, 43. And
I think it was 78.
78, okay.
Yeah.
78, he died. And
that's when you did run.
And I did run. And there were 7 candidates in the primary. And Jack Steinhilber, Tim Petri from that area, both were state senators, and 5 other candidates, including my law partner. I found out one day my law partner, Dick Wright, had announced he was running, didn't tell me, and so we dissolved the partnership, but he ran, and I came in second. I beat Steinhilber, but Petri won, and I said, when coming in second, is like kissing your sister. And so that was quoted in the newspaper. Tommy Thompson thinks coming in second is like kissing your sister. And Tim Petri won. He was from the heavily Republican area. And I was way over on the end, the far Juneau County. I carried my area in some counties 90%, and I came in second. I expected Steinhilber and Petri to be very close, and then I would come in third. I beat Steinhilber and came in second, and lost to Tim Petri. And then I came back, and then there was an open for the federal judgeship, and John Shabazz, that must have been 82, when Reagan got elected.
Reagan was in 81.
81, yeah. 81. And Reagan got elected, and there was a need for a federal judgeship, and Shabazz was so conservative, we wouldn't allow for the assistant minority leader to have a separate office. I had to share the office with John.
Is that right?
Yeah, so I had John Shabazz.
You were cheek by jowl for some time.
What?
That you were right next to each other for a long time.
For a long time, we knew each other, and all the things, and then we worked hard to get Shabazz elected. He wanted it, and he got the appointment, and then there was a vacancy, and I just took over the minority leader at 81, I think, wasn't it?
That sounds right.
Yeah, and I became the minority leader.
How did your style of leadership differ from John Shabazz once you took over the caucus?
Completely.
Completely. Well, what did he do and what did you do? What's the difference?
The difference was John Shabazz was very autocratic, and John Shabazz was very intelligent and extremely hardworking. He knew all the legislation, and I worked extremely hard too and read all the bills. I think we're probably the last 2 leaders that ever read every bill, and that's would be until midnight reading bills together. But he wanted everything to flow directly through him, and he didn't like to share power or decision making, and I wanted to build a more all-encompassing caucus and hand out the leadership and get more people involved, get more involved, more participation on the floor, more speech making by other things, more people writing amendments, more people being on Joint Finance Committee. I wanted Joint Finance Committee to be more active, and so on and so forth. So I was much more all-inclusive, and John was much more dictatorial and on down. So it was a big change, and it was, everybody has their time, and my time was that period of time, and I was able to develop a lot of support, and people really liked the new. Anytime you
You had a lot of
change,
support from your caucus for the new open.
absolutely. And when I ran for governor, just about every member of the caucus, I think, supported me, which helped me win in the primary, which was a tough race. So we opened it up, and we passed legislation. And one thing that John and I were similar is both of us knew the rules of the assembly better than anybody else did. Better than the speaker, better than the parliamentarian. We knew the rules, and we could stymie everything, and that really irritated. And if you remember that, I got the moniker Dr. No.
I was going to ask you about that. They called you Dr. No. Do you take umbrage at that? Is that a point of pride?
What?
Is that a point of pride, or?
I don't know as much as pride, but I wanted legislation, with a Republican bent, and I could never get it. Just the same way that we had pushed through everything, when the Republicans were in control from 1966 to 1970. We dominated and we cut the Democrats out. Democrats did the same thing for the next 24 years. They just absolutely passed it. And Shabazz was so not at all agreeing to anything the Democrats did. Everything was a fight. And so they pretty much, changed the procedures to dominate and control and push things through. And they were doing the same thing when I was, and I fought back. And so I knew the only way I could really have any influence was the same thing Shabazz did, was to stop legislation. Uh-huh. And I had a stack of amendments on my desk. Every time I was writing amendments and putting them in, they get so mad, I'd have to read these amendments, and just a minute, Mr. Speaker, I got another amendment. And I'd hold the floor for a long period of time, drafting amendments. I bet I drafted more amendments by hand than anybody else has ever in the history of the legislature. I don't think they even do that anymore. But I was drafting handwritten amendments. Then they'd have to stop and go out and copy them and get them all distributed. And I gummed up the work because they wouldn't. And so then I'd make them vote on my amendments. And when I did that, I was able to stop legislation. And they gave me the moniker Dr. No. Tommy's always there to stop, never to do anything. And I was trying to look at as ways to have an influence, have an impact on legislation. And so I used the amendment process and the power of the minority leaders and the fact that I knew the rules better than anybody else and could use the rules to my advantage that I got. They were so irritated and frustrated with me that they gave me the moniker Dr. No. But it was more of a necessity on my part to have an impact, and I fought hard.
And with the support of your caucus.
It was the support of my caucus, yeah.
So
and they supported me throughout my gubernatorial. I never had one veto overridden.
When you were in the assembly, you always had a farm and a law practice. Why were you involved in those?
Before we do,
endeavors?
can you? I got to tell you the bathroom story.
All right.
I just broke. I had to go to the bathroom, and that's when we had to have an intermission.
Okay.
I got to tell you the Warren Old story. I think it's priceless. I was just elected governor, and we went through, the festivities on being sworn in. Warren Knowles came through the line, and I thought I was honored because I served with him in the assembly and didn't always get along with him, but I always respected the man, and he looked like a governor. The gray hair and the demeanor. He was just a really nice gentleman. He says, "Tommy, could I come in and see you tomorrow privately?" And I said, "Sure, Governor, absolutely. I'd love to talk to you." So at 9:30, set up the appointment. 9:30, the first day in my new office, and after being sworn in as governor, and Warren Knowles comes in, and I figure he's going to tell me, how to act and how to be a governor. And so I took up my yellow pad and a big table and sat down, and we had coffee and we chit-chatted for a while. Mm-hmm. I said, "Warren, what did you want to talk to me about?" So I want to tell you, and he says, "What I'm going to tell you, Tommy, you're going to think is really strange, and you probably will not have to adhere to it right now, but I'm here to give you some of the best information you'll ever need as governor." I said, "Okay." What
your
is it?
pad ready.
He said, I said, what is it? He says, never pass up a bathroom. And he says, you may think that's funny, but he says, when you're governor, he says, you never know where you're going to be able to go to the bathroom. You can be on a dais, and people are going to be speaking away, and you have to go to the bathroom. Be very uncomfortable. You can be going through a school or whatever, or go through a plant. He says, always, if you see a bathroom, go to the bathroom, because you never know when the next bathroom is going to be, and you're going to be very uncomfortable sometimes. And I thought, he left, and I thought, gee, that's really, straight. That was what his message was. But the older I get,
First day in office.
the first day in office, and the older I get, the more, you have to go to the bathroom, the more I remember the Warren Knowles advice, and it served me well. And he says, you'll never, I don't know if you remember the Abraham Lincoln story, but Abraham Lincoln was in terrible discomfort on the day of the Gettysburg Address. He was not supposed to give he was not the main speaker. They had another speaker that spoke for an hour and some minutes that spoke, and Abraham Lincoln had to sit through the whole thing, and I guess his aides were going crazy, and he had to go to the bathroom. So it was it happens to all leaders eventually, because everybody has to go to the bathroom. But Warren Knowles told me the story, and I just thought that was priceless, and that's why when I had to go ahead and tell you that story. But now go ahead, back to your
I was
question.
asking you about the farm that you had, or
Yeah.
still have apparently.
Yes.
And your law practice. These were
Well,
things,
I was practicing law, when I got elected in state. As soon as I got elected, I didn't have any means of income. I was single. I was living with my parents.
Well, what did the legislature pay at that time, Assembly?
I think $8,100, $5,900 or 81.
Okay.
It wasn't, and I never wanted to be a full-time legislator like a lot of people want to be today. And I wanted never to have to depend upon my legislative salary. And I spent my time going to law school, so I wanted to practice law. And so I first started with Wally Brady, and then I moved in my own office in Mauston, and eventually I had an office in Mauston and Oxford and Elroy. And so I wanted to make sure I didn't have to depend upon it. I wanted to be independent, so I could vote the way I wanted to and not have to worry. And if I got voted out, so be it. I'd have means of income. And so that's why I started the law practice. And then I got married, my second term, to Sue Ann, and we started having children. And I had this opportunity to buy this small farm, and I thought, what a great opportunity. And so I bought the farm, didn't have any money, borrowed money to pay off a 100-acre farm. But it was a working farm, and we put in crops and raised cattle. And my wife would feed the cattle with the kids, when I was down here in the legislature. And my mother-in-law lived on the farm. So it was a small working farm of 100 acres. And then I decided that I needed that, for sort of a getaway. And because I would work Monday in the law practice. I started out Monday morning in Elroy. Monday afternoon I'd go to Mauston and go into court. Tuesday morning I would go into court in Mauston for probate and wills and do real estate. And then I would get in my car, drive to Madison, work Tuesday night, all day Wednesday night, work Thursday. The old Alan Busby, taught me back when I worked for him. I learned.
Right.
And so I went back, and then on Thursday afternoon I would go right to Mauston on my way off the interstate, and I'd spend Thursday afternoon there. And then Friday morning I'd go back to Mauston. Friday afternoon I would go to Oxford, Marquette County. Oxford was my Friday afternoon. Then Saturday morning I had my Elroy hours from 8 o'clock to noon. And then in the afternoon I'd spend on the farm Saturday and Sunday. And it was great therapy for me, because the cattle didn't care how I voted. They didn't care how I handled their divorce. They didn't care, about real estate or things. They just cared about, getting fed. So it was great therapy to get away from the legislature and the practice of law to be able to farm. So it was really my opportunity to get away from it. And Sundays, I would work on the farm, and Sunday was also a day, going to church, being with the family, but also a campaign day. So that's how I spent I was a workaholic and still am.
20 years in the assembly, what changes did you see over that time in the institution?
Well, it was
67 to 87.
It was a lot of changes, Mike. The big changes is that we got more help. When I started in, just think of this, when I started in Joint Finance Committee, there was Russ Olson and Ken Merkel, myself, Merrill Stahlbaum, and 4 of us. We had no aides and 2 secretaries, and we all shared offices. So that's how we started, and we started with 1 secretary, and for the 4 of us, and then we eventually, I think the second term, we got 1 secretary for 2 of us, Catherine Libby, and she loved me, and she was Ken Merkel, and I shared an office with Ken Merkel. And Catherine Libby was our secretary, and she was just a wonderful woman, and she worked very hard. She loved me, and always did my work first, even though Ken Merkel was the senior. But Ken Merkel didn't mind, and we worked very hard. But we had to do our own work. We didn't have any aides. We didn't have a private secretary or a private office. We shared offices and so on and so forth. And so, eventually, it became more professional. It was also when we started with the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. It was during that period of time, and that's when Dale Cattenall set up the Fiscal Bureau. I think it was the first term. It was either the first or second term.
Sometime in the late 60s.
Yeah, in the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. So they became more. So we started becoming more professional. Fiscal Bureau started when I was on the Joint Finance Committee. We started getting more help. And so throughout the years, the legislature has grown with more assistants, more associates, more office space. We had all the constitutional officers in the Capitol. We had all the senators in the Assembly, and you shared offices, and you shared secretaries. You didn't have 1 secretary or 1 aide per legislator. You had to share offices and share it, and we got everything done. But more of the work was done. We didn't have these fine, a TV room like this. We didn't have any of this. We didn't have any, and the caucuses were small, but they were supposed to do all the reach out work, and for writing press releases and getting information out, and that's what it. But you didn't have the professionalism that you have today in the legislature.
When did the idea of running for governor occur to you? Was this something you thought of in 1967 when you came in? Someday I'm going to be governor, or when did that start? You finally ran in '86.
I was always aggressive. I was going to. I ran for the Congress in 1979 and got beat, and then I came back and became the minority leader. And I thought, I always wanted to be Speaker. People don't believe this, but my goal was to rebuild the Republican Party in Wisconsin and have enough people to control the Assembly so I could get my legislation passed. So I really was vying for the speakership, and Lee Dreyfus, that big election between Lee Dreyfus and Bob Caston, and Lee Dreyfus won.
78,
and then Bob Caston, and then 82 comes, and Dreyfus says, no, I'm the minority leader, and I'm still trying to put together a majority in the Assembly, and Dreyfus steps down. Dreyfus calls me that morning before he announces, and he says, Tommy, I'm going to announce at noon that I'm not going to run for re-election. And I can remember tearing up, and I said, we didn't always agree, but he was an honorable person, and nice, fun to be around, funny. And I remember sort of crying and asking him to reconsider. He said, absolutely not. He wasn't. He made his decision. He's got a job with Century Insurance Company. He's going to make some money, and he's going to get out of politics. And Joyce was, he still said, he said, I'm going to spend my time with Joyce. I'd much rather be home at night with Joyce than out on the road campaigning. And so he made the announcement. A lot of people at that time asked me, you know, to run. They thought that, you know, but Terry Kohler. And once again, Terry Kohler came and talked to me, and he said, I know you're getting some pressure and to run. And he said, I've got a better chance. I'm the Kohler name. He says, plus I got the money. And so Terry said, you know, you should not run. And I decided not. I think Lowell Jackson ran against him or something. Ran against
I don't recall.
in the primary. And Terry won the primary and went on to lose to Tony Earl in '82. And so then I didn't mind not running, and I was supported Terry Kohler and worked hard for him. And I could see at the end where he got up and one of his big problems was he got up in front of superintendents of schools. I don't know if you noticed it. They brought in the candidates. Tony Earl. Tony Earl was very articulate, and it was very well publicized that they invited Terry Kohler to come in, and Terry Kohler says, "I got 5 things that's going to improve education," and his wife was Mary, and he said 1, 2, and 3, and then he paused and he couldn't remember 4 and 5. And he said, "Mary, what is 4 and 5? What are my positions? I'm going to help education. What are my 4 and 5 issues?" And of course, the press killed him. That he couldn't remember, and he had to ask his wife. And that really was one of the turning points in the election. And I don't know. I mean, there were stories written about it. The press picked up on it. And then we picked up a few seats in the assembly that year, even though Terry lost in the election of '82. And then in '84 was the big election. We still I think we're now in our low 40s in the assembly, and Loftus was the majority leader, and Tony Earl was. They thought that we weren't going to, and I said I was going to pick up. I think 5 seats in the election of, and they said absolutely not. In fact, you're going to lose seats. And I went around with Avi B. and Diane Harmlich and Barb Benson. Barb Benson was with the Republican Party raising money. Diane Harmlich was my assistant as minority leader, and Avi B. ran the caucus. And we went all over recruiting candidates. We spent ungodly amounts of...
This is in '84?
'84. And the Democrats were betting that we were going to lose seats. And I came back with the help of those 3 ladies. Barbie Benson raised the money, Avi B. and Diane, and I'm speaking all over it. And we go and we're staying in these $8 a night hotel rooms, and we didn't have any money. We had Barb Benson had her car, and the 3 of us had a car. And Diane and Avi would stay together, I'd stay together, and Barb Benson would come in with her.
You're all over the state.
All over the state. And we got good candidates, and we campaigned hard. I didn't go home for days on end trying to get people excited and to vote for the Republicans. And the Democrats just thought they had a great year and were shocked when the election came in. I picked up a lot of seats. I can't remember, it was 5, 6, or 7 seats, more than I had said that we were going to. Tom Loftus got on, I still remember Tom Loftus be one of the moderators, and I was the other one at one of the local TV programs.
Election night's show.
Election night, and Tom was very confident he was going to win. I was, hopeful, but not that confident. And then we saw the returns coming in, and by 9:30, the trend was headed in favor of the assembly. We were picking up seats that Tom Loftus didn't think we were going to, and Tom Loftus stopped the program and said, I got to go. And he went back to the caucus no matter what the hell was going on. And I stayed there for a while, and then I came back, all optimistic about everything. And I felt, that if I could win across the state, and I had worked really hard and worked hard with the local parties, I said, I have a chance to be governor. Because, I've got this support now, and I worked really hard. And I picked up seats. I can't remember. I think we came back
47 out of 99 or something like that.
Something like that. I think that's the figure. And it came close to majority, and people couldn't believe it. It was the story that the Republican, and I engineered the whole thing along with these three ladies, and we won. We came back strong and optimistic about the next election, being able to take over a majority. And the Democrats started realizing that there was a force to be reckoned with. And so I decided, to think about running for the governorship. And Terry Kohler came to me in 1985 with a poll. And I still remember this. He came and asked if he could have lunch with me down at the Madison Club. And I said, sure, Terry. And we went down there. He was there with Mary, and he had just commissioned a poll, and he had it fresh in his hand. He says, he said, I can't show it to you, but I'm going to tell you something. I'm not running, and I want you to run, and Tony Earl can't win. His numbers are so bad, he can't win. And you can be elected governor if you run.
This is the year before, 85.
85. In spring of 85, he had done a poll, and Tony's numbers were bad. And so we had the lunch, and he wouldn't give me the poll because sometimes it was the legality of it, sharing information or something he had to do. So I never to this day know what the numbers were, but Terry Kohler said, Tony's in deep trouble, and you're going to win for the governorship if you run. So I came back, and that day, Diane Harmlich was my assistant, and we talked about it in Avi, and they said, well, let's go for it. And so we didn't have any money, and we worked out of Diane's house, her apartment, her condominium, and Avi's, and the three of us, we started building up support across the state. But I had been going out and doing a lot of speaking at caucuses and Lincoln Day dinners and so on and so forth. So I was well known throughout the party. And then we had that huge primary, and I think there were 7 candidates, 7 candidates, and everybody thought either Jonathan Berry or George Watt was going to win, but I won. I got 51% of the vote in the primary, which was an amazing thing.
So you were governor. I was going to ask you about your perspective on the veto power.
Yeah, I will, but because that election, this should be for history. The gubernatorial election was really nobody. Tony Earl saw all these candidates. There was a professor at the university, a nuclear engineer, who ran for Congress, was running for governor. There was a barber in Milwaukee, Jose, running for governor. There was George Watts, who had the restaurant and the big crystal shop in Milwaukee.
Yeah, sure.
Watts
Tea House.
Tea House. And then Jonathan Berry switched from becoming a Democrat, and myself. I thought there was 1 or 2 other ones.
Probably, I've got a list of them somewhere here, but
and so we went up to
Ortiz, Watts, Berry, and Thompson.
There was a professor.
Wiley?
Wiley.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we went up to the election, the caucus, and this would have been 85 in Superior. Republican State Convention. And George Watts had Jonathan had not declared that he was going to switch at that time.
He was still a Democrat.
He was still a Democrat. And so it was George Watts, Wiley, Ortiz, and somebody else. I think, Don Hanaway was running for governor.
Oh.
Don Hanaway was running for governor. And we went to Superior, and we had Little Orange. We didn't have any money, so Diane and handmade in Avi, and we cut out these damn Tommy for governor and handed them out all over the convention. And we went up to the convention in Superior, and we carried the convention. And this would have been in the spring of '85. And so then I knew I had support in the party. So we won that, and then I had in August of that year, I had my first fundraiser in Wisconsin Rapids. Kathy and Gary Vanetta at their house. And they didn't charge anybody, but they invited people in from Wisconsin Rapids to area and Port Edwards, and from the cranberry marshes and from the paper companies. And I remember speaking, and they had a big crowd, and they turned out, and I made $5,800 that night. And I said, my God, if I can raise $5,800, I can raise money to run for governor. It'd be peanuts now to run for governor.
And is this the first time you ever did any serious fundraising?
Yeah, absolutely. And so $5,800, and that was the money from that night. And they didn't charge anybody. This is just money people wrote on a check after hearing me speak. And so I came home and I had $5,800, and then we had to run, and then my birthday was coming up on November 19th, and I had to break into the Milwaukee, so I went over to see Fred Luber and Joe Heil. Joe Heil's grandfather had been governor, and they decided to throw a birthday party for me, and they sent me back the invitation, and there was no money on it. And I thought it was going to be a big money raiser. And I called Fred, and I said, there's no money on it. And he says, Tommy, he says, nobody knows you down here. Nobody's going to pay you to come in here you speak. He said, I'm inviting these people. I said, well, how are we going to raise this money? He says, trust me. He said, if you can do a good job speaking, we'll raise the money. But he says, nobody's going to pay you to come to hear you speak. So here I had the $5,800. The next fundraiser was in Milwaukee in November for my birthday. And a huge crowd showed up. It was at the Grain Exchange. It was a huge crowd, and they came, and I spoke, and nobody paid any money. So we had to pay for the hors d'oeuvres and the booze and stuff, and so I was pretty much tapped out. But then people liked me in Milwaukee, and I kept coming back, and Fred Luber went back to these people and said, don't you like this young Tommy Thompson, and won't you support him? And then, so we started trickling some money coming in from that Milwaukee event, even though it was never, you'd never do that again today, but that's how we started, a fundraiser without raising any money. And then I had a Christmas party that year, and was invited to a Christmas party. I was still the minority leader. It was a Christmas party by the utilities. And Kenyon Kai's was the utility lobbyist, and he had one in his office, a Christmas party. And I went over to the Christmas party to see, and I was running for governor. I hadn't announced, but I wanted to see, if I could raise any money over there. And I ran into Jim Clauser. And Jim Clauser was there, and I followed him in when he went in to get another drink, and I said, Jim, I'm running for governor. He said, oh, I know you're running for governor. And I said, I can't win without you being on my team. And he said, I just got off of a campaign, and I'm never going to run another campaign, and I don't want anything to do with it. He said, I wish you well, I'll support you, but I don't want to have any part in the campaign. And so I said, would you just please think about it? And the next time I saw him was in 3 weeks in January. And I said, Jim, have you thought about it? And he says, yeah. He says, what do you really want me to do? And I says, Jim, I'm a very poor person. I got a wife and 3 kids. And I said, the chances of me winning are very slim. But I want to try. I'm going to be out of the legislature. I'm going to have to go back. I won't be able to practice law this year. I just want to make sure at the end of my campaign, I'm not in debt. I said, I'll spend whatever we raise, but I don't have any money, no personal money, and I don't want any debts because I got a young family. And I said, all I want you to do is you monitor the books, however you want to do it, and don't ever let me get below what we have in the bank account. And so he said, okay. And that's how Klauser, that's the story how Klauser and I started.
How long had you known Klauser, and where did you know him
I've known him
from?
a long time, but never really close. Never really close. He was in the Senate, working as the Senate caucus chairman, and then he ran.
Okay.
And I was in the Assembly. So we had dealings, but we knew each other well, but we were not close friends. But then he decided, and every week he was doing more. And then the next time we get together, I'll tell you the story. We got one time down to $18 and the same amount of money on the registration, $18. $18.15 when we gambled all the money we had, and it was his decision. It was the right decision, but we never ever got below zero running for governor, and that's a story for another day.